Let's take a dogmatic preliminary look at the ultimate questions, which is just to try to state some things. One, we have all kinds of explanations for the current situation in the Western universities, at least, but then there's a further set of questions as to how much these questions are the real thing in power and how much other forces are in power, such as the question of dividing empiricism or things that are testable from the so-called mind, from heft or strength from mind, and other ways of making that division. But in the universities, we could say this expresses itself through questions that we can press back to the modern development as we see it in Descartes. And if you look at Benjamin Franklin, for instance, he says the three most important guys are to Kerr. He says some nice things about Jesus on the side, but he doesn't consider Jesus a divinity. And then he says Francis Bacon is one of the three most important guys. Who else does he say? Newton, and not sure who the third is, but in any case, maybe could it be Locke? I don't know. That's worth knowing who the third is, but in any case, it's they're all names of the modern development. So we could see, of course, Descartes, but what I want to set up is that the problem we get it from Descartes, and as it's laid out in documents like the Port Royal logic, which is the big logic that came out most proximate to Descartes, mean that the phenomenology of the cogito sum are active in all our universities. And so a specific take on this. So this is what we have to set up the avenue of invasion for, which is to say Descartes has taken a specific tack on this cogito sum issue, maintaining that reason survives the radical doubt, the omnibus dubitandum, and that its reason, as it were, it sort of recalls already the logical positive solution. So, but this is not the only way to take the cogito sum situation. So we're going to have to try to set up where we can look at this and then see how the fact-value distinction, which is, so for instance, the Hoover Institute guy, the Scottish guy on the Hoover Institute, so-called historian, Neil Ferguson, in order to say, because this post-Descartes situation leads to saying, can social scientists legitimately tell us what to do politically, given that they have the problem of the total division between the so-called facts that they produce. Facts are always the things made, and then there's each department has its own manner of saying whether the facts have been legitimately put down according to the standards of the department. So for instance, like in statistics, when they talk about whether there's sufficiently representative data rather than anecdata, so-called, is one of their jokes. Anecdata, the plural of anecdote, is not data, or some kind of joke like that, because they have specific standards for saying whether there's acceptance in their departments of these so-called facts. But then there's this question whether then it's like each department is just producing, like Samuel Beckett, something and just saying, well, here it is. And then so for instance, in Weber, Weber, one of the early students of Nietzsche, there's already this presentation whereby one says, what you do is present to the class this factum according to your research, and then let them vote on it. And then Neil Ferguson basically seconds it. Oh, the Wissenschaft and Max Weber's version of science, that will save us. This is actually the congealed Nietzschean form. So this guy that's presenting himself as a conservative is telling us to use the Max Weber version, which is an early form of Nietzscheanism, as the key here. So we have to look at how this division happens more directly if we're to so-called, quote-unquote, think for ourselves. The only way we can think for ourselves is, so if we take it that this problem has come down to us, if we take it that it's in power and the university is still in power, if we take it that the current moment is more important than the former moments, even though the origin is still bursting forth within history, then it follows that we have this difficult task of really understanding what happened and what the cogito sum means and how it becomes these questions, especially the question of psychologism, especially the question of in John Stuart Mill in the early half of the 18th century, this question of whether psychology or logic is predominant and what psychology is. And then John Stuart Mill comes out with this view that psychology and logic move exactly together. So for instance, in the question of the law of thought called non-contradiction. And then all kinds of difficulties arise out of this sort of question of which is to take the predominance. So you got the psychologism problem. And psychologism, along with the problems connected to the fact value or fact norm or wertfreie Wissenschaft, or this Weber version, we have this congealed point on the this simple thought experiment, but we have to be able to sort of access it correctly, and we have to, as it were, prime ourselves to see what's at stake in it.